Here's another question for us to look at. Remember, it's a 20-point answer in the History All Around Us exam. So let's have a look at the question itself. It says, what challenges are there when trying to understand the appearance of your site when it was first created, and how could someone overcome these challenges? Use physical features of the site as well as your knowledge to support your answer. It's really important that we highlight straight away that this part, use physical features of the site as well as your knowledge to support your answer, that will definitely appear in whatever question comes up in your exam. You can see that I've already highlighted the words in which we're going to dissect. We're going to focus on challenges. Are there when trying to understand the appearance of your site when it was first created there, and how could someone overcome these challenges? And so here we can see that challenges essentially means what difficulties were there in trying to understand the appearance, meaning how it looked, of your site, meaning the plant works when it was first created. We know that was in 1853, so what difficulties were there in 1853, and how could someone overcome them? Well, that means how could you solve the difficulties of trying to figure out what it looked like. Here is my overview of how I would go about answering this, but let's first of all zoom in on the exam question to remind ourselves. And we were focusing, remember, what challenges, remember that meant difficulties, are there when trying to understand the appearance of your site when it was first created, and how could someone overcome these challenges? We need to use physical features of the site as well as knowledge to support your answer. Okay, so the clinching argument is very similar to how I would start this and to smack the examiner in the face. Essentially, I think what this question is about is making sure you understand the challenges around historical inquiries. So my clinching argument here revolves around how there are always difficulties when looking at appearance of historical buildings from the past. We can attempt to overcome this by using historical evidence such as archaeological artifacts, original plans, photographs, etc. So essentially my clinching argument is that if we use the range of evidence that's available to us, then we can overcome the challenges that we'll look at shortly. So let me have a look at some of the key words that we've got here. The key words that I would be focusing on would be, of course, the site, archaeological, evidence, artifacts, and appearance. So site and appearance, they link to the question, and that links to the warning, which I'll come back to in a minute. When thinking about the mark scheme, it's really important that we've got at least 4 main points. For full marks, 4 main points. And we must be including knowledge and features of the site, and I'll refer to that shortly. Connectives, we're used to this by now. We should be using this throughout. This meant that, and consequently, as a result of this, and this led to. Remember what I keep saying, how this is the language of explanation, and it's important that we move away from just describing things to actually explaining. And then the warning revolves around, remember it's a 30-minute answer, and we must keep making links back to the question. So you'll need to keep mentioning that notion of the challenges and using about the word appearance and first created. So that's really, really important. And as I alluded to at the beginning, I would start this off very similar to the clinching argument itself. But I would make sure that I mention that the site was first built in 1853. So I'd start this off to smack the examiner in the face. I would make reference to how there's always difficulties. There's always difficulties when it comes to looking at the appearance of historical buildings. But I'm going to use examples of archaeological artifacts, original plans and photographs. Let's have a look at how I would set this out. Paragraph 1, I would highlight the fact that the first challenges, of course, is that part of the site no longer exists. As we know, about 2/3 of the site was demolished. We know that the existing Wabtec site has similar buildings, and we can use them to draw conclusions, because buildings from the past, and this is where we're using knowledge of the existing features, we know that the shape of those workshops where the Flying Scotsman was built and all those different buildings there, they were similar throughout. So we can use them to draw some conclusions that they may have been similar. We can't say for a fact that they were at this stage, but we can say they may have been similar. We know we've got photographs of it being constructed, we've seen, and we know there are photographs of it being demolished at the beginning of the 21st century, that should be, the 21st century. We know that, but we do actually know that there were photos from that period. So those photos are really useful from the time of when we had lots of photography. However, it's important to consider, did the appearance change? For all we know, we're not quite sure whether it changed or not. And that links in really nicely to challenge number 2. We weren't actually there in 1853. It's important we know we use that date because it shows we have knowledge of when it was first built. And we need to consider the question, did it actually change in appearance at some point from when it was first built? We don't fully know that. What we can use to give us some ideas, and we know that there are original maps and that shows the original layout. We need to make reference to what we already know of the site, and we know that we can use satellite imagery via Google Maps, and that was important because it gave us an overview of the footprint of the original site. But there are still problems, there are still challenges with that. It doesn't show us specifically what it looked like when it was first built. Carrying on from challenge number 2, the fact that we weren't actually there in 1853. We can use archaeological evidence that we found during the field work to piece together its appearance. Remember, we saw lots of examples of those engineering bricks, so we have some example of potentially we know what the outside would have looked like. We know that there was pipework outside on there because that's what we discovered. We also knew that the concrete structures had examples of steel and metal wire in them to help to reinforce it, so we know that it was a large building. Essentially, my 4th paragraph, I'd actually highlight the nature of historical inquiry itself. I think that's what the question is hinting at in order for us to be able to explain that we need to make references to the challenges. There are always constant challenges in history. The challenge around studying the past and how we need to use a range of evidence to be able to draw accurate conclusions. And that's the complexity around this question for me. And so we need to use a range of the archaeological artifacts that we found and discovered, the original documents that we've been aware of, like the maps that we saw. The satellite imagery would give us some indication of where it was set, and we know we've got a huge range of photographs. Then we may be able to overcome some of the challenges of the difficulties that are posed.